Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Chadwick. And today on the show, we have Jen Diamond, and we're going to cover a number of topics with Jen, mobbing to learn, mobbing at work, and freestyle mobbing. And so to get us started off, Jen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about how you started mobbing and things along those lines.
Okay, so my name's Jen Diamond, and I'm a self-taught developer. And if you hear noises in the background, that's my husband Lars. He's in these COVID times. He's also he's a Go programmer, so you might hear him in the background pairing. And let's see. So I started out as an artist. Went to art school. Ended art school, tried to be a rock star for a decade, didn't pan out. Started a bike jersey business and had to sell them, so made a website and ended up having that, turning that more into a business and learning web dev stuff, and just kind of kept learning more and more about web devs and programming, and that kind of turned into my full-time gig. And so I'm pretty self-taught. I have taken lots of classes and made opportunities for myself to learn, including I started out at in Railsbridge, which, you know, the Sarahs started, and that was probably about 2013, and got rolling really with Rails, and then I ended up running Railsbridge, and then Rails Girls came, the Pepsi to the Coke of the Railsbridge, came to Los Angeles, and then I took that over, and I'm the organizer, been the organizer of that since forever now, like 7 years, and I ended up doing Rails Girls Summer of Code for like twice, which is it's kind of based off Google Summer Code, where they have the first year that they ran it. It was 16 teams from around the world of 2 pairs and then coaches, and so I ended up working on Bundler, which is the package manager for Ruby. Like, if you've ever done any Rails projects, you constantly are saying bundle something. So it was basically to get pay people to work on open source projects. And then I did it again the following summer at Pivotal here in Los Angeles. Mike McCormick and Pat Maddox was our mentor, and he is the one who introduced us to mob programming and Woody Zool, like our team, and we mobbed all summer with the devs from Pivotal, working on this cool project.
Nice.
So, and then and then I took and that. The long answer, I guess, is the long answer. Yeah, and so it's been a long path for me to get to being a web software developer, and and I brought mobbing to my first job, brought some friends of mine on, and then now I'm at UCLA. I work for the library, making software for the library.
Fantastic.
And we mob almost every day.
Okay, so I guess that's kind of a good segue into mobbing to learn, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and your experiences with mobbing to learn, and yeah, let's go ahead.
So because of Pat, we started mobbing on this one particular project, and we did like 10-minute intervals, and we had the best setup at Pivotal. We had like the screen and the conference table and snacks and everything that you could want, comfy chairs, and we all took turns mobbing. We had some glitches in that team. We had to work through them. I think that glitches are expected, right? Like you have to really work through emotional learning is incredibly emotional, right? Like you have, especially when you're an adult, because you have to just bring yourself back to like feeling vulnerable and open. And yeah, so I think mobbing can help with that, and it can also be difficult with that at the same time, right? But if you're in the right, with the right people and in the right environment, I think it's fantastic because, as you know, you can share all your secrets, like not secrets, but your tricks, whether they be like just shortcut codes or like you can see how fast other people type or not fast. And
Yeah.
you can see like,
Very
just
exposed.
like all their like little quirks. And it's like as Sandra had mentioned in your other podcast, like it's it's social, right? It's great. It's a really nice way to work because you don't have to just be pounding your head against the wall to learn something. You can ask somebody else, get stuck less often. And so for learning, we found it great. Like I set up, I had a meetup at the time that met every week. And then during the week, I created this group of friends out of that, and we would meet at a coffee shop or someone's house or something, and we would work on, we'd make up silly projects, and we would just work on these projects together, like reach for a peach, and which was some kind of I don't know, New Year's resolution project, and within working on that, we learned a lot, and we learned like what we didn't know. And just before this meeting, I was working with my team. Our team lead is taking a 3-month leave, and we're have to figure out like a brain dump for him and how to replicate his brain and everything he knows so that we're not caught out. So it's transferred from like beginning knowledge to like, very current learning where it's like, okay, we all just mob together, like figuring out, here's a giant list of everything that we do not know or are unsure of, and we need to document all this stuff. So yeah, I think it's incredible for learning.
Fantastic. So what would you say the contrast or compare and contrast you have for example, before you were mobbing versus after mobbing, when speaking about learning? I guess what did you notice the differences were from the standpoint of how quickly you understood something or others? And so I heard a lot of stuff about like empathy there. What other compare and contrasts do you have from before mobbing to after starting to mob?
Yeah, I guess when I started programming in Rails, like, and I got the Hartle book, the Michael Hartle's Rails book. I think it was even the third one, the second or the third book, right? There were no meetups then. There was like barely any tutorials on YouTube. There was nothing, right? There was no connection between people. So I would just go to the coffee shop by myself and like type out the things like a dog. Like I felt like a dog typing. I was just like, oh, just type these words and someday I'll understand the words, I guess. And then I would get stuck on something and have no idea and just like be stuck for weeks. And turns out it was an S, because it's always an S in Rails that you didn't type. That ruins your week. But and so it was so hard to find anyone to help or to work with, and I struggled with that for a really long time. And I had a meetup group, but even so, like during the week, like the meetup group was really, I started, it wasn't even meetup. It was just like, hey, people I know, I'm going to be at Panera Bread for, I'm going to be somewhere at, at this time every week, show up, I'll be there. And like every week, at least one person was there. And like I said, we formed a group out of that. And yeah, like I remember sitting at the coffee shop alone, like just being stuck, and it stunk. Like, so yeah, so I feel like, just working with other people, the struggle is far less to just be able to like, rubber duck somebody and then you speak it out loud and, oh, that's what I forgot, right? Like it's, but yeah, mobbing's definitely much better than a rubber duck for sure.
Yeah. You get feedback on your ideas constantly. You see how other people do it, so you can learn by example, things like that.
Yep.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So I had a follow-up question. So you were mentioning the emotional aspect of learning and how mobbing made it easier for the emotional aspect of learning, but also harder in some ways. Do you mind extrapolating on that? I guess what especially jumps out to me is what makes it harder with mobbing.
Well, especially in a work environment, I think it's the vulnerability aspect can be difficult, right? Because you're hired as a professional, so you're supposed to know certain things, and if you belie that, you don't know something, that's a really vulnerable position. I feel like our team is incredibly great at that. Like nobody makes anybody feel bad for not knowing anything. Everyone's very verbal about what they are unsure about. And I work at a library, and so they're very, like, the meeting I just came from was a documentation meeting, and every month we meet for an hour where everybody stops everything and documents what they've been working on, and there's clear documentation about everything. It's incredible. Like it's an important thing where I know most places in documentation is not important, but here it is. And yeah, like you're saying, like the I guess yeah, like the emotional aspect of it is, I don't know, it's frustrating, right? Programming is incredibly frustrating. It can be. So our team does a lot of, like, what I call like freestyle mobbing. Like we don't take turns and we don't set a timer. We just we try to do that on the fly of like, oh, I've been doing this for a really long time. I've been, typing and talking for the whole time or whatever. And we try to switch it up. But we use retros a lot to, like, just kind of think about what we should be changing. Because, our team didn't used to be Agile, or before I started there, my boss and I were brought on like the same exact day, like a day apart. And he was brought on to like make the UCLA library dev department be an Agile team, because previous to that it was like more like old school, like, super siloed and like totally not, totally waterfall. Like, when is the project done? When the librarians are happy with it. What's it about? Some stuff that they want, like.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit earlier mobbing at work in general. And so I know you wanted to say a little bit more on that. And so I guess, you have like mobbing to learn and then mobbing at work. And so I guess let's just start there. Is how is it different? You also mentioned freestyle mobbing, but what's the difference between the learning environments you've had and mobbing and the work environments you've had and mobbing?
Let's see. Well, I guess when I was at work, when I actually had an hour and a half each way commute from Echo Park to UCLA, because no one can afford to live in Westwood, really. We had our individual areas to work in, and we were kind of a mixed team of remote workers and in-person workers, and so we did do Zoom chats a lot, and we worked with an outside consulting firm. So, and sometimes even the people who were just across the campus, we would Zoom with them because we were too lazy to walk across the campus, or it was raining. Well, once a year here in LA. Or even in the next cubicle sometimes. They would Zoom in, and it was just easier. So I do find, like Sandra was saying, working remotely is kind of more effective because you can all just be focused and you can all be on your computer together. Then it's cool when you're all remote or you're all together, I think. Having like a couple remote people definitely leaves people out. But the difference between, like you were asking, mobbing for work and mobbing to just learn, I just think the stakes are higher, I think, when you're working. There's tickets, they need to get done. There's very specific deadlines and tasks and live production code that you can't destroy. Live data.
So would you say
stakeholders.
Would you say the lower risks are help you learn faster, but the emphasis on high availability at work is also something that the mob can attack together, sort of thing? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of drift a little when you're just learning to learn. You can kind of drift off, and the focus isn't I think, the reality of like having a project that's why learning using a project is critical, right? Like to make a project that you care about in some level with real data is like a way better way to learn than just doing a tutorial, or even if you're, like mobbing with people, and it's way better than doing a tutorial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. I'm pretty, so it might be jumping ahead topics here, Chris, but I'm pretty interested on this freestyle mobbing that you've been mentioning a couple of times. So maybe one is, I have a series of questions, but one is, how would you define it if it has a definition, if it's too free to even be defined? And how did you get there? Was it just something you fell into, or did you try out various ways and then ended up liking it? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I would also call it lazy mobbing, like I said earlier. Like, I mean, I started out with like really strict mobbing with the timer and everything with Pat and Woody and you guys were there too, or on vacation, on leave. But down in San Diego, when we visited, we saw like Woody in action, and the first mob sessions that first mobbing group, I think, that you guys had. I think it had been going on for a couple of years already. So we were doing that like full time, like every day, learning, and that was great. Like 10 minutes, and we kind of changed the times, and like just kind of we tried to be agile about what we're doing, and tried like a minute, like how fast can the rotations go, and like let's make sure we stand up when we rotate instead of just like verbally rotate. And we had a term we called hot potato, and somebody like would be like, let me try that, and put their hands on the keyboards. And we had like a whole, we had like our whole like list of like what our mobbing intentions were for our group, and we changed them over time. And I guess like freestyle came after that, when it was a less directed setting, when it was like at a coffee shop. But even at the coffee shops, we didn't do it with timers, but we did it like we did switch like pretty regularly. And I just find, and then my first job with Thomas and Ken Q, we just kind of all were at one station, and we worked together, and yeah, we just took turns with the keyboards. Like, and I kind of really liked that, where we were all just chipping in what we could at the time, instead of taking turns with being driver and navigator. We were just trying to solve the problem. And because in that job, we were all juniors, and the seniors, all the senior devs were like off site. So it was really just the three of us trying to get through the tickets together. So we just like chipped in whatever we knew to like try to solve the problem. And I find that's sort of what the method that we've been using at work now, is that we all just kind of chip in what we know to solve the problem, and we don't have particular times where we switch. It's more like when we get tired, somebody gets tired, and we realize like, oh, this person doesn't talk. I'm pretty chatty, so I have to like restrain myself sometimes so I can leave some space for other people to have some room to contribute.
Would you say that yeah, so it sounds to me like you're still optimizing for flow, but you're not strictly distributing navigation time and things along those lines, but the idea is still of single item whip and lean flow in relation to ship to mobbing, means that you have this idea, and all these people have the pieces, the components to this idea, and they get together, and it kind of popcorns out, and then that solution ends up getting built out based off of the collective knowledge of the people. But all of the other maybe rules or restrictions that might be put in typically by probably coaches and things like that can so it can be flexible, or it can be more flexible than a lot of people are putting out there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned to my group, I watched a lot of your videos the other day, and I mentioned to my team like that I wanted them to watch some and just try out some methods for a while, and just see, and at least write like kind of like our thoughts of how we would like it to run, because we've never really done that. Most of the people had just really been working by themselves when I started there, and it was definitely a switch to get people to work together. But everybody responded really well, and everybody likes it. And during our retros for like a year, like things that worked, like not just me, like everybody else would be like mobbing, pairing, like, so it's really been super effective for our team as like making it a real team instead of just like a bunch of solo developers doing things.
Yeah, so I like talking about that dynamic actually too, because I've often seen software developers in a team, or I've heard this talked about often, is that they were never a team. I think Jason Kearney's experience report from when he was first mobbing was titled something like my first real team in software development. And so like I've heard this kind of anecdote a lot of hey, we never really knew each other or talked to each other enough to actually become a real team until we started mobbing. So yeah, I mean, do you have any other observations around that? That's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's nice to be friends with the people that you work with and not have it just be like, oh, these work people.
Yeah.
I used to have an attitude about work, like work is what I do when I'm at this place, and then I come home and have a life.
Yeah.
Well, work is so, like, it's 3/4 of your life. So, geez, if you're not enjoying your work, then that really stinks. It's like 3/4 of your life is like not living. So, yeah, so I like that aspect of it. The social, I'm pretty social. And I think people are social in general. I think this idea that people just want to be working alone in a dark room, like, is that really like, that's not very modern, like a modern programming life. I don't know. The code's better. I think the code ends up being better. And then like, when someone leaves, you have a lot healthier environment for continuing forwards. And I mean, that's sort of the issue that we're facing now, is that part of my team is mobbing together constantly, and one other person who, the lead works a lot on his own. So it's hard. So that's what we're running into now. Andy, that's you. Andy's great. I love Andy. But yeah, he's, it's more like the COVID times have like forced him into working by himself, really. But yeah, like that's definitely like something to be aware of. I think is if parts of the team are working together all the time, and then there's one person like he's taking leave, and now we're definitely have a deficit because of that.
Yeah.
In our own knowledge.
So I mean that's really interesting too. And so yeah, there's all these like older knowledge sharing activities, things like code reviews and just comprehensive documentation in lieu of personal interaction, right? Things like that. And mobbing kind of takes care of that. And you also reminded me of something else about this idea that you free up the isolation, right? So like somebody working by themselves all the time, especially kind of like if they're quarantining or just not being around other people, then the social isolation can actually be really impactful in somebody's life. And so, remote mobbing can be a good way to kind of, eliminate the need for things like, comprehensive code review and things like that. At the same time, increasing people's social interaction or availability for interaction, things like that. So that's great. I mean, and as far as learning lessons from what has already transpired, you can always have those things kind of come up in retrospectives and talk about it. And, I don't know if anybody necessarily needs to be forced to mob, but a guided tour through the code might be also a good option.
Yeah, we do. We actually we've made room for that. We do have, like, we do code reviews and stuff on bigger things that were like, whoa, how did you do that? Could you walk us through like what you mean, and ask like a lot of questions?
I find
which I do think it is really helpful, right? Like the thought process going through it is great because you're there for it, but even if you can see it all tidied up and perfect at the end, sometimes it's easier to follow like the direct path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's the whole idea of maybe tricky or not necessarily tricky, but clever code, right? Writing it alongside a person can be a lot easier to understand than reviewing the clever code after the fact. And so it's always true. Yeah. Yeah, so we covered a lot of topics: mobbing to learn, mobbing at work, freestyle mobbing. Is there anything else you want to cover, or anything that you want to plug? While we're here on the show.
let's see. Oh, well, I'm running Rails Girls again. And I run it, the workshop every October in part of Innovate Pasadena, which is like this incentive to bring more like tech jobs to Pasadena, which they have Caltech. You would think it was a no-brainer, right? But they have like a month-long initiative every year, and then they have a week called Connect Week. Anyways, so I do a workshop that weekend, and we're doing it with Rails Girls and Vue.js, so calling it Viva la Vue, because La for LA and the feminine article La. And yeah, and you know, Rails Girls is, and that it's like an initiative to get more women into programming. Which there's definitely a deficit there. And we definitely use pairing, well, mobbing really for learning in those workshops. So there's like the direct pair of the two students together, two or three students, and then they work with a coach. So like not one-on-one, but one coach to two people, sometimes one-on-one. And that's an incredible knowledge transfer, because it's pretty rare case when a beginner gets to sit down for a full 8-hour day with a senior dev and ask all the questions that they want going through the tutorial, and them, you know.
Yeah, can aspiring women developers join this from anywhere, or do they have to be in that area, the Pasadena area?
It doesn't have to be Pasadena, but we've had people come in from like San Diego and Las Vegas and San Francisco. Weirdly, like they don't have enough awesome meetups and stuff there, but it's mostly local people.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's going to be remote, but yeah, it's pretty much like there's Rails Girls all over the world,
Sure.
In like every single tiny little country all over the world. But this Vue one's definitely a newer type of thing.
Awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes.
What?
We'll put a link in the show notes to.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and if you know any aspiring programmers. It's very beginner oriented, but yeah, the base level is like interest.
Yeah. Austin, do you have any other questions or anything else to add?
I actually did have a little more questions on the freestyle stuff, because that topic fascinates me. So what was pretty interesting was that it wasn't arrived at, because it was like you guys tried many different types of mobbing and pairing, and it sounds like you've tried more styles than I've tried. And so there's lots of retrospectives, and so a lot of that seemed pretty healthy, which was very, very encouraging. And I think it also, when people hear freestyle, like I've talked to some mobbers who are concerned about equality of navigation, they just think like, oh, what I envision when I hear freestyle is basically one person coding, like driving and coding silently, and then other people checked out or something like that. And I've also seen freestyle done well. And I guess my question to you would be, how do you keep the mobbing healthy with less of the guardrails of the timer or anything else to keep interaction high or anything like that?
I think we just kind of try to be aware of each other, and I don't know, we've worked together for almost a couple of years now, and so we're kind of aware of each other's personalities and our own, because we're not 20. So so like personally, I know I have to like step back from time to time and just be quiet and listen, and I think self-awareness has a lot to do with it, and awareness of other people. I remember when I first started programming, like, or the first job I brought mobbing to, and the three of us were mobbing, and we were pretty much all the same level, but I had to realize to find my own voice and to like when to be like, not be blown over. Like when I had an idea and was like, hey, like, let's try this. And they were like, yeah, whatever, Jen. And I was like, wait a second. I should have stood up for myself because we just spent 2 hours doing this other thing. And my idea was right, turns out. And if we spent 5 minutes, like trying it, like we might've gone in a different direction. So I guess, it's not to say that I'm always right, but I'm just saying you have to know yourself, right? And you have to know like when to step back, when to like push forwards, listen to the other people, and it's a group process, right? And some days you're not as good at it, and some days you're awesome at it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like a flow of like even this conversation and this recording. We don't have a timer to say like, oh, now it's Chris's turn to talk, and then it stops, and now it's my turn to talk. You know what I mean? And and so it almost seems like freestyle in some ways could be the ideal, but it just takes the maturity that you're talking about to be like, I've been talking too long. Let me see what others are thinking, or we've been doing Chris's idea this whole time. Why don't we try someone else's idea? And so it has the flow of a more normal conversation, but I guess it takes self-aware people probably retrospecting to make it work. Because I've been in a more freestyle mob, and it was healthy, but I did realize that it had that healthy flow. Where I've heard of other freestyle mobs where it's kind of the driver and the watchers kind of thing for long periods of time, and so I'm always interested to see how others make the freestyle work.
Yeah, we had to, we used, we mobbed a lot on some learning at work where we were learning, first we did this whole CSS refactor that was crazy. Like we ripped out all the CSS and started from scratch and like used the smacks of the version of CSS where it's more like object-oriented. CSS, which is, it's more component based. So it's like a really easy transition to having a JavaScript front end if you wanted to. And even if you don't, it's still like just a lot easier to understand because we're trying to be more and more like full stack dev, like not have a front end team and not have like full-on DevOps team. Like we're trying to like have all of it. I mean, no one really has all of it, but to some level, right? And so, yeah, so the CSS had gotten really gross. So we were like, let's just rip it all out. And we got, I think, a full month to refactor that. And we mobbed on that together, and that was intense because it was learning and learning how to do it, and like and we were under a deadline, and we were replacing stuff and refactoring and opinions and everything. So that was definitely intense, but it was super fun. And then we had another learning cycle where we replaced a lot of our integration tests with Cypress tests, and that was less fun refactoring and mobbing because it was just not a very interesting mob situation. There wasn't a lot to like hold your attention. It was definitely more like, let me just do this on my own for a while, and then we can come back and see if like we're looking at it together. It was really boring, I'll say, mobbing situation. So after that, we kind of were like, okay, let's check out just working on our own for a while, and like mob like certain hours a day, or mob if we are only stuck. like get stuck on something and then only do it for like an hour and then take a break. Because like when we were doing the learning sessions, we were doing it for like 4 hours or 3 hours and not even taking a break, and just like it got so much that everyone got kind of burnt out. So we've had to readjust after those big learning sprints.
Nice. Very cool. Well, did you have any other questions, Chris, or are we ready to close this out?
I think we can. We'll put links again in the show notes, and thank you very much, Jen, for being on the show.
I'll send some links to the stuff that we're doing at UCLA, which is super, super interesting.
Okay, great. And we'll have that in the show notes. So as always, yes, please.
Super throw out to Pat Maddox, and I love Pat Maddox, and he's awesome. And if it weren't for him and Mike McCormick and many other awesome mentors and coaches, and Lars Lettinen, my husband, who's awesome, like I wouldn't be the programmer person I am today.
All right. Well, yeah, that's great. And
thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Super fun.
So to all our listeners and our viewers out there, if you found this episode particularly helpful, or maybe somebody you know should see this episode because you think they should, then please share it with them. And we will see you next time. Keep mobbing and stay agile. Like, share, and subscribe. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys.